Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Collins, Senator Warnovich. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I'd like to submit my written statement, please, and summarize. I'll very briefly discuss what is at the root of what I believe is at the root of violent Islamist extremism, which I believe is Islamist ideology, and Mr. Nawaz has explained it in great detail, so I'm grateful to him. I will skip the certain parts. Second, I will talk about the institutionalization of Islamism in America, which is, I think, a very serious problem, growing problem. And finally, I will highlight some areas in which I think the US government has adopted self-defeating policies and then suggest some alternatives. I understand for most Americans, dealing with Islamism is extremely difficult because it is associated with Islam. Very few people dare to question beliefs or actions of Muslims because nobody wants to be called a bigot or Islamophobe. That is why we need to be very clear. What needs to be countered is Islamism, the political ideology, not Islam, the religion. The religion itself is compatible with secular liberal democracy and basic liberal civil liberties. The political ideology, however, is diametrically opposed to liberal democracy because it dictates that Islamic law Sharia to be the only basis for the legal and political system that governs the world's economic, social, and judicial mechanisms, and that Islam must shape all aspects of life. Although various Islamist groups differ over tactics, they all agree on the end game, a world dictated by political Islam. While many do not openly call for violence, they provide an ideological springboard for future violence. The first modern Islamist movement, as we know, is the Muslim Brotherhood, and numerous splinter groups came out of it, often more radical. And they have in turn given rise to yet more other splinter groups. So consequently, there is now an exponential growth of fairly radical Islamist organizations active all over the world, including in cyberspace. Of course, not all Islamists will one day become terrorists, but all Islamist terrorists start with nonviolent Islamism. For example, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of September 11, was first drawn to violent jihad after attending Brotherhood youth camps. In fact, Muslim Brotherhood motto says it all. Allah is our objective, the Prophet is our leader, the Quran is our law, jihad is our way, dying in the way of Allah is our highest hope. Islamism is ultimately a long-term social engineering project. The eventual Islamization of the world is to be enacted via a bottom-up process. Initially, the individual is Islamized into becoming a true Muslim. The process requires the person to reject Western norms of pluralism, individual rights, and the secular rule of law. The process continues as the individual's family is transformed, followed by the society, and then the state. Finally, the entire world is expected to live and be governed by Islamic principles. So it is this ideological machinery that works to promote separation, sedition, and hatred. And that is at the core of Islamic violent extremism. I think it is important to underline that violent Islamists believe they're engaged in what is called a defensive jihad, which has broad acceptance among many Muslims. The logic is that under just war theory, armed jihad can be waged when Muslims and Islam is under attack. And since the West is waging war against Islam, if not militarily, then culturally, Muslims have an obligation to participate in a defensive jihad. Now let me very briefly discuss two Brotherhood splinter groups to show how these groups progressively become more radical. Hizb ut-Tahrir, HD, was founded by a Brotherhood member who over time wanted to use a more radical methodology and started his own organization. HD's key focus has been the creation of a worldwide Islamic community, Ummah, and the reestablishment of the Caliphate. For many decades, these ideas were considered extreme. More recently, they have been adapted as mainstream by most Islamists. HD members claim to want freedom and justice. Correct me if I'm wrong in this, but the freedom they want is, I believe, freedom from democracy, and the justice they want can only be found under Islamic rule. Under such rule, Muslims who do not abide by Sharia law will be, quote, in their terms, considered as apostates and liable to punishment according to Islamic law. Or to put it more directly, they will be executed. The freedom and justice HD seeks by overthrowing democracy can often only be attained through violence. However, HD is not likely to take up terrorism itself. Terrorist acts are simply not part of its mission. HT exists to serve as an ideological and political training ground for Islamists, and I have called them a conveyor belt to terrorism. In order to best accomplish this goal, HT will remain nonviolent, acting within the legal system of the countries in which it operates. The same can be said actually about many of the Islamist organizations, including the Brotherhood. These groups do not need to become terrorists because winning the hearts and minds is much more effective in achieving the ultimate goal. But of course, they do not rule out the use of force if they cannot establish their caliphate via nonviolent means. HT has then led to the formation of even more radical and militant groups than itself, such as Al-Muhajirun. The founder, again, was at first with the Muslim Brotherhood, then became a Hizb ut-Tahrir member, and when he had a falling out with the leadership of HT over tactics, he formed an even more radical organization. Note that the difference in all these splits was not about ideas or ultimate goal. It was about how best to achieve them. Al-Muhajirun has direct links to Osama bin Laden, to Hamas and Hezbollah, and blatantly advocates for terrorist acts. Over the years, it has sent hundreds of British men to Afghanistan and Pakistan for jihadi training. Some of those have come back and attacked the homeland on 7/7.